This is a romantic tale of an unacceptable or forbidden love affair resulting from racist motives between a free white Sudanese Arab girl and a black African Negro boy from South Sudan. It was written in English and translated into Arabic by Dr. A. Ahmed. Copyrights. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored, rival system, or transmitted in any form or by enemies without the prior written permission of the author, except by a reviewer who may quote brief passages from the review for printing in a general magazine, a school journal, or a university article. All characters in this love story are fictitious, and any resemblance to real people, live or dead, is purely coincidental. Chapter 51. Life Threat Against the Brave Arab Girl. Kulaba neighborhood is the second most popular place where Sudanese students like to spend their evenings in Bombay. It is a widely popular tourist site. Many visitors to Bombay are Arabs from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Oman, Muscat, and the Gulf countries. Everything a foreign tourist needs to entertain himself is available in Kulaba. There are many Arabic restaurants there. There is also the famous five-star hotel, Taj Mahal Palace. It was built on the shore of the Arabian Sea. Almost everyone in Kulaba speaks Arabic and Hindi. Kulaba is also famous for its large commercial center. Moreover, the place is famous for having the most beautiful girls in Bombay. As a result, tourists who have no interest in sightseeing allow beautiful, slutty Indian women to become their main sexual attraction. 99% of Arab tourists come in thousands every year to India to enjoy cheap sex with those local prostitutes. As people say, tourism for the Arab man is the woman. Everywhere they go in the world, Arab tourists look for prostitutes and street hookers. For North Sudanese students, Kulaba is a place where they feel closest to their Arab culture. Besides, it is a strategic location made it the best playground for political and religious activities. Political and religious groups that have an article to distribute or an important issue to discuss will stay up there late into the night. After having dinner at the International Students Hostel, the foreign Sudanese students will proceed to Kulaba. On Sunday evening at 7 o'clock, the Communist Party issued its report on the fight between the brave Arab girl in Saf and the head of the Ansar al-Sunnah al-Muhammadiyah. An hour later, the Muslim Brotherhood circulated another article on the same topic. The first article favored Insaf's courageous action and condemned the action of the religious leader of the Sunnah Muhammadiyah community. The group in question put out a newsletter 3 hours after the accident. In the bulletin, they described himself as a Muslimah who had converted to Christianity, God forbid, an apostate girl who had fallen from the religion of Abraham. They encourage all Muslim students, foreign or Indian, to shed her blood and kill her as an apostate Muslimah who became a Christian infidel. Moreover, they stated that their leader boarded the 9 p.m. train to New Delhi. The leader of Ansar Sunnah al-Muhammadiyah went on an urgent mission to the Sudanese embassy in the capital of India to report the crimes of the infidel apostate Sudanese girl Insaf, who is also a notorious drug dealer and a dirty prostitute. At 10:30 p.m. that night, the Sudanese Students' Union issued its official report. In the report, they condemned Insaf by name and considered her a disgrace on the pride forehead of Sudan and a scandal for Sudanese Muslim Arab students throughout India. The President of the Union promised in his letter that he would send an official report to the Sudanese ambassador to confirm the apostasy of the former Muslima in South and expose her other criminal and immoral activities such as drug trafficking and prostitution in the city of Bombay. Meanwhile, Matthew's Christian family took the life threat to the Sudanese girl in South seriously. They have already filed a complaint with the Bombay police against the Ansar Sunnah Muhammadiyya leader and his terrorist group. In their complaint, they asked the Bombay CID police to investigate possible Islamic terrorist activities taking place inside the International Students Hostel at Charjigate Station area in downtown Bombay. Then the family members gathered that night on their terrace to discuss the seriousness of the life threat and find a way to protect the innocent young Sudanese mother in South. Mark suggested that the family seek advice from Khalid, a Sudanese student from the communist group who was his friend. The Indian family tried to contact Khalid that night to discuss the serious matter with him. Mark went 4 times to his apartment, but he could not find him. On each visit, Mark would write a note and slip it under the door. He asked Khalid to come to his house at any time of the night after he returned it to his apartment. The Christian family waited for Khalid until midnight. At 1:30 a.m., Khalid returned to his apartment from the Kulaba area to Kalina area. Mark's many notes forced him to rush to the family home. Khalid had already guessed why he was summoned. As soon as he entered the family home, the Indian maid directed him to the balcony. Upon entering, he saw every member still awake and waiting for its arrival. Khalid then showed the family the 4 news articles that had been distributed to the Sudanese students in Kulaba. At Mark's request, he translated the 4 articles for the family. Then Mark asked, "Do you think the religious leader is as serious about his threat for Insaf?" "Yes, of course," Khalid said anxiously. The Sudanese religious leader of Ansar Sunnah Muhammadiyya meant what he said. What will he do to Insaf? There are laws and police in this country, Mrs. Matthew asked angrily. They may not harm her while she's in India, but their article mentioned that the leader went to New Delhi to meet the Sudanese ambassador and report her. Lilian asked, "What can the ambassador do to Insaf?" "He may return her to Sudan." Mar asked, "Had the ambassador ever sent a Sudanese student to his country?" "Yes, he did it twice." Mark asked again, "Which of these 2 students was accused of apostasy from Islam and embracing Christianity as Insaf did?" "None of them left Islam and converted to Christianity." Lilian wondered, "Then why did the ambassador of Sudan deported them to their country?" "The first case happened many years ago, before I came to India. It was the case of an Arab girl from the northern Sudan called Shaugia. She was accused of having sexual relations with several foreigners and Indians. So they accused her of being a bad girl and a prostitute. They said that she was riding motorbikes with Indian men and moving freely with Arab foreign men. She also started it wearing pants and shirts. Once Shaugia traveled to New Delhi and tried to renew her Sudanese passport, the embassy confiscated her passport and returned her on an emergency travel document to Sudan. The Sudanese ambassadors sought help from New Delhi police to extradite her to Khartoum. The second case occurred only 6 months ago. It is the case of a northern Sudanese student named Salim Hassan Salim. His story was very tragic. He was arrested 2 hours before his flight to Sudan. He did not know that the embassy had already planned his trip. Only his cousin, who was the assistant leader of Ansar Sunnah Muhammadiyya, and the 2 Indian police officers who arrested him knew about the plot. The two Muslim Indian police officers had received bribes from his cousin to do this. The embassy was able to illegally obtain a certificate from a mental hospital in New Delhi, describing the poor mental health condition of the Sudanese foreign student Salim Hassan Salim. While he was having dinner at the International Students Hostel in Bombay, he was forcibly taken into an unmarked police car and taken directly to Bombay International Airport. They did not give him a chance to change his clothes, say goodbye to his friends, or collect his luggage. Mark asked, why did they send him back to Sudan? Salim did not commit any crime. It was his family who wanted him to return to his homeland because he had wasted many years in India without studying. He failed several times in university exams. Then he dropped out of college and started it, leaving without doing anything. The youngest daughter of the Indian family, Emily, asked, do you think, Khalid, that the Sudanese embassy could conspire with that religious leader against Insaf and send her in the same malicious way to her home country? Yes, of course, it can do that. Most likely, the embassy will plan something very soon to bring her back to Sudan. Insaf is accused of committing extremely heinous crimes such as apostasy from Islam, conversion to Christianity, drug trafficking, and prostitution. One Qadi said those words, Insaf started crying. The Indian mother put her hands around her waist and hugged her very warmly. Don't worry, my daughter Insaf, Mrs. Matthew said sadly. We will not keep our hands idle and allow those terrorist Muslim religious fanatics to take you back to Sudan and execute you as an apostate Muslima woman. Her son Mark said, I don't think anyone can extradite Insaf to Sudan because the Bombay narcotics police has her Sudanese passport. Moreover, she is still on trial. A Sudanese atheist student Khalid said, these terrorist Muslim fanatics have no regard for any foreign laws or a concern for human rights. If they had the opportunity tomorrow, they would kidnap Insaf and retain her in handcuffs on the plane to her country, as they did before to the Sudanese girl Shawgia. After a long silence, Mr. Matthew said, what I do not understand is, did that religious leader who went to the embassy to complain against Saf because she converted from Islam and embraced Christianity, or because she slapped him in front of his friends? Mark answered his father's question. It is clear that this is because she converted to Christianity. Mr. Matthew continued to the second question. What made you say that? Mrs. Matthew said to her husband, Mark is right. Insaf hit by her high heel and blinded that bad Sudanese student who insulted her in the criminal court complex. And no person legally sued her to the police or complained to the embassy. Everyone agreed with Mrs. Matthews' conclusion. Listen, Khalid, Mark said, Insaf has become one of our family. Before you came here, we planned to send her to southern India. We have many close Malayali relatives in Kerala province. The only problem is that she is on trial in Bombay, and so she must be here. She has to appear in court every 2 or 3 months before the judge. What is the correct measure in your opinion to protect her from these Islamic terrorist groups? I was talking with my communist friends about the issue of Insaf before I returned today. We all agreed that she should apply for refugee status in India. If she is granted refugee status, neither Sudanese embassy nor the Indian police will be able to force her to return to her homeland, Sudan. What an excellent idea, Mark said excitedly. How can she get refugee status? Mrs. Matthew asked. She must go to New Delhi and apply for asylum in India at the United Nations office. They will ask her to file her case and explain why she is afraid to return to her country. Khalid is a very smart young man, Emily said happily. Listen, my son Mark, you have to book a flight for me and Isaf to New Delhi tomorrow, Mrs. Matthew said. Mark said, okay, ma'am. Ma'am, I also want to go with you and my best friend Isaf to New Delhi, Emily said. Okay, Mark, add Emily too, said Mrs. Matthew. Listen, Khalid, everything we discuss tonight, keep it top secret, Mark said. Khalid replied, of course I will keep the matter top secret. Chapter 52. The evil conspiracy against the Sudanese Arab girl. The appearance of the accused Arab wife Insaf Salah al-Junaid before the court has become monotonous to the point that she can predict everything that will happen. The suspect gathered in the courtroom. The judge enters. Everyone stands. Someone takes their attendances. The judge makes another appointment, and then everyone is asked to attend the next hearing day. Insaf was told by suspected foreign girls that this repeated process could continue for many years before an Indian judge could finally investigate their case and decide who was guilty and who was innocent among them. In one of these frequent court sessions, Insaf came to the criminal court with Mark and his wife Lillian. She carries her baby Deng Jr. on her shoulder. The Indian judge came as usual and everyone stood on their feet. He sat down and they sat down. The clerk of the court came forward and announced their names, starting from suspect number 1, Christina, until reached suspect number 10, Insaf. The 10 suspects are an ugly, hunchbacked, old Afghani man, over 70 years old, his beautiful 23 years old Indian girlfriend who calls him Sugar Daddy, a Nigerian mom, 4 Sudanese girls, and 3 Sudanese boys. The old Afghani man was the one who sold drugs to the Sudanese girl Christina on the day of the mass arrest. His beautiful Indian girlfriend, known as Radha Krishna, is younger than his Afghani granddaughter named Tahira. The beautiful and sexy Indian prostitute Radha Krishna cares about the money in his pocket instead of his ugly face and old age. As soon as she showed herself, Insaf took her little child and placed him on her shoulder. She knows her attorney will inform her about her next appearance date. As she stood up, she heard her name called again. The Indian judge shouted, Insaf Salah al-Junaid. The Arab wife was surprised to hear her name called twice. She thought the court clerk had pronounced her name again mistakenly. Insaf answered loudly, I am present, sir. The main judge said in a deep, commanding voice, Is it possible for you to come here? Then Insaf turned her face and looked for the person who had invited her to come forward. She was terrified when she discovered the source of the voice ordering her to come forward. Instead of coming to him, she sat on the same bench and remained silent. The Indian judge shouted at her, Aren't you the suspected Sudanese foreign woman Insaf Salah al-Junaid? Yes, I am, the Sudanese girl said in a trembling voice as she wept. The judge shouted angrily, Come forward then. Insaf stood up from her seat, carried her son on her shoulder, and walked slowly toward the angry Indian judge. Come here quickly, the judge ordered. The frightened Arab girl quickened her steps and then stood in front of him, her body trembling with terror. Listen carefully to what I have to say to you, the judge continued, speaking seriously and in a loud voice. I received this letter from the legal advisor of the Sudanese embassy. It was supported and endorsed by the Sudanese ambassador himself. The embassy requested the court to transfer your case to Sudan to be tried there. There is a a mutual relationship between India and Sudan, so I have the right to refer your case to a Sudanese court in Khartoum. I would have done it without telling you if you hadn't been indicted on drug trafficking charges. No matter what they say to me, I will not agree to transfer such a serious offense to another country. Then the Indian judge stopped for a moment and looked seriously at the face of the suspected foreign woman in Saf and saw her crying face. He probably wants to make sure she follows what he tells her. The judge continued. Under this letter, you are facing some legal charges in Sudan. You fled Sudan and your ex-husband was arrested and convicted of a crime. Both of you are involved in some type of serious crimes punishable under Sudanese criminal law. The letter does not say what crimes you committed. So once this trial is over, I will do one of two things. If you are convicted of drug trafficking, you must be sentenced to prison in India. Once your prison term expires, you'll be deported to a Sudanese prison. If you are proven innocent of this drug charge, I will immediately return you to your country. Either way, you will not escape but prosecution in Sudan. You will be extradited to Khartoum city on the same day the Bombay Criminal Court completes its final ruling on the legal charge against you. I have sent a copy of this letter to the Narcotics Police Department of Bombay and requested them to mail your passport to the Sudanese embassy in New Delhi. Then the Indian judge stopped again and looked at the Sudanese foreign defendant in Saf. He saw many tears falling down her cheeks. The sponsorship of your bail will remain valid if the Indian donor agrees to pay another 3,000 US dollars for your bail. You have 1 week to contact your benefactor and inform him of the additional fee. If he is not ready to pay the rest of the amount, some policewoman will come to your place and take you back to the woman's prison, and you have to stay there until this drug trial is over. As soon as the judge finished his instructions, Insaf felt as if a long, dark tunnel had suddenly opened before her. She covered her face with one hand and began to cry piteously. Mark and Lillian rushed to her and led her out of the courtroom by the hand. Outside the courtroom, in the court complex, the sad Arab wife began to hear the joy and applause of the Northern Sudanese students. As usual, they started shouting many insults at her. The Sudanese student who lost his eye and became blind due to her attack with one of her high heels screamed at her and called her again a disgusting whore with a big, smelly pussy. Your big pussy is bigger than the mouth of a whale and can fuck a stick of a shepherd and my leg and hand at the same time. The Indian son Mark told her to ignore those useless Sudanese students. Then his Indian wife Lillian led Insaf's hand until the three reached their car. The Sudanese students followed her to the car and formed a mob. At the same time, they are happy and thank their God Allah for what their embassy did to the filthy apostate Muslima Sudanese woman and the notorious drug dealer who left Islam, embraced Christianity, and became an impure Christian infidel girl. Therefore, they believe that the apostate Arab girl in Saf brought shame to the name of their beloved country, Sudan, and also corrupted it, the name of their beautiful religion, Islam. On that day, Mrs. Matthew and Insaf had no choice but to travel by the Rajdhani fast train from Bombay to New Delhi. Mark tried to find a flight for them, but all the planes to New Delhi were fully booked for the week. The Sudanese embassy's letter to the court forces them to go to the United Nations office in New Delhi and request its assistance. The accused Insaf, who received a death threat, had already applied for refugee status a month ago when she traveled with her Indian mother, Mrs. Matthew, and her Christian sister, Emily. But she did not receive any response from the United Nations office. She was told that if she did not get an answer within 2 weeks, her case would be suspended unless she provides additional information to support her application for refugee status in India. A final decision in her case will not be made. That day, the Indian Christian family discussed the matter with the atheist Sudanese student Karim, and he warned them that the Sudanese embassy might plan another way to extradite in South Sudan. The first plot of the embassy to retain her through the judge of the criminal court in the city of Bombay was not entirely successful. The Sudanese ambassador will not wait until the trial is over. For this reason, the Arab girl rushed to the UN office to provide them with the new development of her case. The main problem in South faced was trying to find a way to convince the UN office that the legal charge against her in Sudan was not a criminal offense. She has no evidence to prove her marriage to her African husband Deng Majok Nasser. In this case, the UN office will either accept her words or try to verify them through the Sudanese embassy. At 10:30 a.m., Mrs. Matthew and Insaf arrived at New Delhi railway station. They took a taxi and went straight to the United Nations office. They waited 2 hours before Insaf could see her legal advisor, who interviewed her a month ago. She told the legal advisor about the embassy's letter to the Bombay Criminal Court and the reason that prompted her to flee her homeland. Her legal advisor did not commit to helping her. Instead, he told her that his office should verify her claim by contacting the legal advisor of the Sudanese embassy. For this reason, Insaf was advised to return within 3 days. Mrs. Matthew and the Arab girl decided to stay in New Delhi until they got the final response for the UN office. They spent 3 days at the YWCA Center. On the appointed day, the Indian woman, Mrs. Matthew, and the Sudanese woman Insaf returned to the United Nations office. This time, the legal advisor invited Mrs. Matthew to attend with Insaf. When he offers them seat, the officer begins to inform the applicant Insaf of the outcome of his investigation. The officer said very politely, "I have received an official letter from the legal advisor of the Sudanese embassy regarding your criminal case in Sudan. In his letter, he answered all my questions. His letter stated that the Sudanese woman Insaf Salah Junaid was tried and convicted of murder in Sudan. The criminal court in Khartoum sentenced her to death sentence by hanging. A week later, before the day of the execution, 2 police men took Insaf to the hospital to perform a pregnancy test, which are mandatory in the case of a pregnant woman sentenced to be hanged to death. At the hospital, her ex-husband assaulted the 2 policemen. He managed to knock down one of the policemen and detained the other. In this way, he helped his convicted wife Insaf escape from the police and the hospital. He was shot by a policeman. Before he assaulted the 2 police officers, the ex-husband prepared all the necessary travel papers for his convicted wife's trip from Sudan to India. The Arab wife Insaf shouted angrily, "These are lies." The UN employee replied, "I know your story, but I cannot ignore the official letter sent by your embassy. Moreover, they sent me a copy of your death sentence." The wife Insaf said while crying, "Sir, the death sentence was correct, but I obtained a presidential pardon from the President of Sudan. Do you have any evidence for this claim?" "No, sir, I have no evidence to prove my claim." Do you admit that you killed a woman in Sudan? Yes, I killed her because she was a bim who wanted it to blackmail me sexually and force me to commit adultery with her rich clients. But your lawyer was unable to convince the criminal court that you killed the woman for your honor. Yes, she couldn't. In this case, I regret to inform you that your application for refugee status in India has been rejected by the UN office, and we cannot accept any further appeal from you. The Arab girl in South put her hands over her mouth and covered her face. Then she started it, crying loudly. Mrs. Matthew put her hands around her and hugged her. Then she looked at the legal advisor with teary eyes and said to him, "Please, sir, look at her tears and the little child she is now carrying in her arms and help her." "I'm sorry, madam. The United Nations office does not assist criminals fleeing from justice." Thus, the UN legal official in India concluded his last words with impudence. Chapter 53. When all doors of escape were closed in her face. After application for refugee status in India was rejected by the United Nations office in New Delhi, the Arab wife in South realized that her problem had expanded beyond the ability of the Indian Matthew family to solve it. How can they help her escape the law? She can escape and hide somewhere in India, but she resisted this temptation because it might put the good Christian Indian family in trouble with the Indian law. So the Arab girl is determined to remain loyal to Mrs. Matthew and to her son Mark, no matter what the cost. Therefore, the Sudanese wife in South, the rejected asylum seeker, returned to Bombay with her young son Deng Jr. and the good Christian lady Mrs. Matthew, and began to await her inevitable fate. During her next appearance, the Indian judge promised to hold the trial within 1 month. He justified his decision based on the receiving numerous requests from the Sudanese embassy regarding the 6 Sudanese students. The embassy opined that innocent foreign students should not miss another year of college, while the guilty should be convicted and punished for their heinous crimes of smuggling drugs from India to other countries. In addition, the legal advisor of the Sudanese embassy revealed to the judge of the Bombay Criminal Court the murder of the evil pimp Haja Shaza, for which in South Salah Jinnat was tried and convicted in Khartoum. Accordingly, the Sudanese ambassador asked the court to cancel Insaf's bail and keep her under strict supervision. The judge accepted the request and increased the bail to 700,000 Indian rupees, equivalent to 21,000 US dollars. Mrs. Matthew and her son Mark agreed to pay the additional amount. The judge promised to give each defendant's lawyer a day to represent his client's defense. For this reason, 4 weeks were allocated for defense. In the 5th week, the court must issue its final verdict on the drug charges against the 10 suspects. In addition to the 7 suspected foreign students, there is the elderly Afghani man who sold drugs to the Sudanese foreign student Christina. There was his beautiful teenage Indian girlfriend Radha Krishna, who was arrested with him on the same day of the mass arrest. For her, he is a red herring and sugar daddy because he is a filthy rich drug lord. The old Afghani man had smuggled himself across the Indian-Pakistan border and became a refugee in India. He is 75 years old and his Indian girlfriend is only 23 years old. Deng's wife in South is the only suspect who came to India on a tourist visa. By then, all 9 suspects had been released on bails. begged by their relatives and friends, except for the born-again Sudanese Christian forest student Atem. He is the only one who remains in prison because there is no one and is scared to save him from the depths of the Indian death camp. Even though his family in Sudan learned of his imprisonment and knew that their son was innocent, they still did not have the financial means to pay even $100 to help him get bail from the notorious Indian dungeon. For 4 weeks, Mrs. Matthew and her son Mark left no stone unturned in their attempt to save Insaf from her inevitable fate. They contacted several churches and Christian institutions inside and outside India and sought their help. Unfortunately, none of the Christian organizations, even those in Europe, America, and Canada, were willing to help. Some leaders of international Christian institutions and pastors of the Christian church in India advised Matthew's Indian family to cancel the bail of the suspected Sudanese woman and return her to prison. Despite this, the good Indian Christian family did not give up and continued trying to find an escape for itself. They helped her to speak on phone with her African husband Deng and with her former Sudanese lawyer Siam Khalil. It was a very difficult emotional time when Insaf spoke to Deng after such a long and painful separation. She couldn't say a word to him without crying. Her husband also cried bitterly when he heard her voice and the difficult and fateful problems she faced in India. Her former lawyer also became helpless and was unable to do anything to prevent the Sudanese embassy and the Indian police from delivering Insaf to Khartoum after her trial is over. Her atheist feminist lawyer Siam Khalil tried to obtain an official document from the criminal court in Khartoum proving that the Sudanese president abolished the death penalty against Insaf. Unfortunately, the court informed the lawyer Siam Khalil that the Minister of Religious Affairs and Endowments had recently lifted her presidential pardon. Then the lawyer received an official letter from the criminal court in Khartoum informing her that the Minister of Religious Affairs had cancelled the presidential pardon for her former client Insaf Salah Jinet due to her disloyalty to her religion, Islam, and several heinous crimes of drug smuggling and prostitution committed in India by her. She is now facing trial in Sudan on charges of adultery with her ex-husband Deng Majok Nasir, prostitution, apostasy, and drug trafficking in a foreign country. The 4 weeks of hearings went by like 4 days. When the last week began, the suspected Sudanese girl had lost all hope. She spends most of her time inside her room with her little boy Deng Jr. in the home of the loving Christian Indian family. She cries silently day and night. Likewise, every day Mrs. Matthew spends several hours inside her room on her knees while praying and crying for Insaf to be saved by a divine miracle. It is a very difficult time for Matthew's family. 3 days before the final trial, Insaf was sitting inside her room, her face filled with tears. She holds her son Deng Jr. close to her heart and looks sadly at his innocent face. She knows that in a few days she will leave him and begin her journey of her inevitable fate. She will either be sentenced to spend 14 years in an Indian prison. If she escapes this sentence, she will be extradited to Sudan and go directly to one of the ghost houses in Khartoum. Then she must wait to be retried in Sudan on charges of adultery, murder, apostasy, and drug trafficking in a foreign country. Reflecting on her dark past and bleak future in Sudan, her bad luck in India. The Arab girl wishes that she had not been born into this evil and unjust world and faces the harsh reality of her socially and illegally unacceptable love affair with the so-called Negro boy Deng and their miserable family life and the unhappy married life they live together in the shanty town in Al-Ushash. The accused Sudanese girl was tempted many times to take her son Deng Jr. and escape from the home of the Indian Christian Matthew family and hide somewhere in India, but she resisted the temptation and was determined to remain true to her promise to them. While Insaf was mourning her fate, she heard a knock on her door. She got out of bed and went to the door and opened it. She saw the Indian mother stand in front of her, her eyes filled with tears. Mrs. Matthew said sadly, "Don't cry, my daughter Insaf. Come with me. We have to go somewhere now." The Arab wife said, crying bitterly, "No, auntie, I don't want to go anywhere. I want to spend my last days with my son. When they take me to Sudan, I will leave him with you. So keep him with you until his father Deng comes to India and takes him from you. Let us hurry, my daughter, and do not take anything with you except your son." "Where do you want to take me, ma'am?" "I can't tell you now. I will tell you when we get there. But there is no one in home. Let someone from the family come, and then I will leave my son with him and go with you. You should take your son with you." Insaf wanted it to resist the request, but she remembered that she had never refused anything Mrs. Matthew asked her to do. So in a short time, she washed her face and combed her hair. She changed her son's clothes and her own clothes and followed Mrs. Matthew out of the house. When the three of them reached the street, Mother Matthew stopped a taxi and spoke to the driver in Hindi. Insaf was unable to understand what the mother said to the driver. She obeyed Mrs. Matthew's leading hand and sat with her in the back seat of the cab. Mrs. Matthew's face looked serious and tense. The taxi gained speed as soon as it left the internal street and entered the city's highway. Insaf felt that Mrs. Matthew was planning to take her somewhere and hide her from the court. If that was her intention, she decided not to obey her. She doesn't want to hide and let the good Christian Indian family face the consequences of escaping the law. She does not want Mrs. Matthew to bear the consequences of hiding the foreign suspect girl who was released on bail. Such an action will not only put her in trouble with the law, but will also create a problem between her and her family. Half an hour later, the taxi exited the highway and entered another busy street. Traffic is becoming more and more congested. The driver continued driving down the street until he reached a very crowded place. The Sudanese wife Insaf saw many cars and large crowds of people. Her first impression that they have arrived at the railway station. Before she could confirm her guess, Mrs. Matthew begged for the taxi and told her to hurry. The kind woman took Insaf's hand and began making her way through the crowd. While she was carrying her young child, Deng Jr. on her shoulder, a Sudanese mother Insaf followed the Indian mother, Mrs. Matthew. "Hurry, my daughter," said the kind Christian mother, dragging the Sudanese wife with her hand. Insaf quickened her steps and followed her aunt until she reached a less crowded area. She realized they had entered a restaurant. Mrs. Matthew occupied a table and asked Insaf to sit near her. Then she took the menu and asked her to choose what she would like to have for dinner. "I have no appetite," a Sudanese girl said. "You have to eat something and feed your babies too," Mrs. Matthew insisted. When Insaf remained silent, the Indian mother waved her hand to the waitress and blessed two orders for the day's dish. biryani with rice and chicken meat. Then she leaned toward the accused Sudanese foreign mother and began whispering in her ear, "My daughter Insaf, tonight you and your son will travel by plane from India to a foreign country. Everything has been arranged for your overseas trip." The Sudanese wife immediately replied, "No, mother, I cannot do that. I don't want to get you into trouble with the police. Moreover, your husband, son, and daughters will put all the blame on you. You don't have to worry about my family or the police. My son Mark is with me on this plan. No one knows about it except him and me. He will be here any moment. But I do not have a Sudanese passport and I do not know anyone in any other country. Where should I take my little son? You are traveling to your husband Deng in London. He is already in England. We will give you the name of and address of the hospital where he is staying." "How did you know that?" "My son Mark called your husband and obtained this information from him. But Mark did not inform your husband Deng of your arrival." "But how can I fly without a passport?" "This is a passport for you. It is my daughter Emily Matthews' passport. You will travel in her name. Your son Deng Jr. has been added to the passport as well." "But I do not look like Emily. Anyone who sees her picture will know that it is not me. We know that it is not mine. This Indian passport has your own photo." "But mommy, this is wrong." "What is more morally wrong, my daughter? Killing an innocent girl like you or changing the photo in the passport?" "But I do not have a visa to go to London. This passport contains a 6 months visa to the United Kingdom." Insaf wants to make more arguments and objection, but Mrs. Matthew pinches her hand, indicating that the Indian waitress is nearby and might hear their conversation. While the waitress was placing the orders on the table, the Arab girl saw that Mark had come and stood behind his mother. When the waitress left, the son sat on the other side of the table, facing his mother and Insaf. Then Mark asked in a low voice, "Mom, have you explained everything to her?" Insaf quickly told Mark, "Yes, she told me your plan, but I don't agree with this idea. I don't want to get you and your mother in trouble with the law. Mark, my conscience won't let me do this to you. The only problem for us will be if they take you to Sudan and kill you there," Mark said sadly. "But you and your mother will go to prison for helping me escape. At most, they might take the bail money. I will tell the police that you ran away when no one was home except my sleeping mother. With your son, you ran away." Mrs. Matthew said, "Yes, I will tell the police officers that I was asleep when Insaf left my house. But everyone will think badly of me. The chair and all your friends and relatives will think that I have betrayed you." "My daughter Insaf," said Mrs. Matthew in a sad voice, "they have already formed a bad opinion of you. Everyone in the church, our friends and relatives, has asked us to cancel your bail and send you back to prison. To them, you are a wolf in sheep's clothing. Many of them have changed their opinion of you and started accusing you of being a murderess and criminal girl, a prostitute, and a drug dealer." Mar said, "Listen, Sister Insaf, my mother and I know your moral integrity and innocence, and therefore we are willing to take any risk to help you." The Sudanese sister wanted to express her feeling of gratitude to the noble Indian brother Mark and his caring mother, but her words failed her. She just let her tears speak for her. Mrs. Matthew patted her head and kissed her cheek. Then she hugged her and started crying with her. Mark wanted to talk more, but he stopped and gave his Sudanese sister and his Indian mother enough time to express their deep feelings. My daughter and son, said Mrs. Matthew in a sad voice, they have already formed a bad opinion of you. Everyone in the church, our friends and relatives, has asked us to cancel your bail and send you back to prison. To them, you are a wolf in sheep's clothing. Many of them have changed their opinion of you and started accusing you of being a murderous criminal girl, a prostitute, and a drug dealer. Mar said, listen, Sister Insaf, my mother and I know your moral integrity and innocence, and therefore we are willing to take any risk to help you. The Sudanese sister Insaf wanted to express her feeling of gratitude to the noble Indian brother Mark, her caring Christian mother, Mrs. Matthew, but her words failed her. She just let her tears speak for her. Mrs. Matthew batted her head and kissed her cheek. Then she hugged her and started crying with her. Mar wanted to talk more, but he stopped and gave his Sudanese sister and his Indian mother enough time to express their deep feelings. The mother then took Insaf's son, Deng Jr., and kissed him several times before speaking to her Indian son Mark. The Indian mother said, crying, asking her son, did you get some foreign money? Yes, this is 5,000 US dollars in cash. Mark then put the money in front of Insaf on the table. Don't let anyone scam you out of your money, Mark continued. Insaf said, as he took the words out of her mouth with difficulty, you are a very good mother. You are a very good brother. You are angels in human form. Mar interrupted her. Hurry, Sister Insaf, the time for a departure to Europe is approaching. We will miss you too. When he had said those words and looked at his watch, the good Indian mother, Mrs. Matthew, and the Sudanese wife Insaf embraced each other and began to weep bitterly again.